Well, there's a lot going on in the world, from the one-year anniversary of the Roe v. Wade landmark decision to the presidential election, as well as the economy.
So how do Americans feel about our current state of affairs? Have attitudes changed? And how will this all play out politically as we creep closer to an election year? Anthony Salvanto is the Executive Director of Elections and Surveys at CBS News. He is joining us now from New York. Good morning to you. We're so happy to have you. Let's start with Roe v. Wade, because Saturday marks 1 year since the U.S. Supreme Court issued this landmark ruling. The 1973 decision, of course, guaranteed the right to abortion in this country, and abortion access has shifted dramatically as a result, leaving it up to each state. So how are people viewing this decision, and what impact do people think it's had over the last year?
Yeah, good morning, guys. It's great to talk to you all, and I want to show you, first off, our latest polling on that. We asked, okay, 1 year after the overturn, what do you think has happened? And a majority of Americans said, 57%, said that they felt it was ultimately bad for the country. Now, why is that? What I think is important here is that the folks who say so point out two big things. One, they believe the health and lives of women are more at risk. And they also believe, 81%, also see it as a constitutional right being taken away. So those two components of this, health and constitutional rights, are both driving that impression. And one more thing that I will add, and that is that a lot of folks, half of folks we talked to, felt that abortion had become even more restricted than they had expected a year ago. So that's a look at the way things have changed over the last year, guys.
Yeah, it is very interesting to see what the Supreme Court does versus the court of public opinion. So this is all interesting. And so we're watching the GOP presidential primaries race get started. Has Trump's indictment impacted things? And if not, why?
Yeah, the short answer to that is no. Okay, so here's a longer answer to that. Okay, in our polling, Donald Trump remained on top of the GOP field, and there was first a continued lead for him among voters who were considering a lot of candidates, but he is the most considered candidate. And then ultimately, when we talk about who are you going to vote for, he is still on top with a wide lead, if you will, over Ron DeSantis there at 61 to 23. But the why behind this, and the why behind the rationale after the indictment, well, let me show you this big difference. Among Republican primary voters, okay, just 38% of them felt that it would be a national security risk if, in fact, as is alleged, those documents contain nuclear or military information. But compare that to the rest of the country, where 80% of the rest of the country felt that would, in fact, be a security risk. And the other point is a lot of those primary voters felt like this was politically motivated, like the indictment was political. And so between those two things, you see a very different view among those Republican primary voters than you do among the rest of the country, guys.
Very interesting. And so what do Republicans want in a candidate?
Well, see, I think that's the key question, because that's the thing that starts the dynamic of the campaign, right? We all know who's running, but what is it that people want? Does it match? Well, first of all, even if it weren't Donald Trump and he is leading, 3/4 of them would then want somebody similar to Donald Trump, right? But he is running, which is one reason that he's leading. But the other thing they want that I find very interesting and important is that for all the talk about many social issues, the things that really come to the top are having a plan to lower inflation, having a plan to lower taxes. These are economic things. And you always come back to that because you want to emphasize, yes, people care about a lot of issues, but those pocketbook ones still resonate for everybody, for Republicans, for Democrats, for independents, guys.
Well, let's get into the economics of it, because that is, of course, a key factor in elections, right? Americans battling inflation, but the job market is good. So how are people receiving and processing this seemingly conflicting and confusing economic news?
Well, I'm going to start by showing you how it reflects on the president, on Joe Biden, because there's two important things here. One is how they deal with inflation. The other is how they process that job market and those fairly good, by a lot of economists say, job reports. Well, take a look at this. Joe Biden gets better handling of jobs and unemployment than he does of the economy, right? So to some degree, they're building in a little bit of credit for him there for the jobs part of it. However, it's inflation that they tell us they're evaluating the economy more heavily on, right? And that we've seen as views of the economy have gone down. And this is a long-term trend I'm going to show you. Things really started to dip when inflation kicked in back in 22 in the minds of a lot of people, and they were really feeling that as they were going to buy things or try to buy things. And then it stayed low, and it has stayed low, really weighed down by inflation. And I think politically going forward, that's going to be a key indicator for how well then the president does as he gears up for his reelection, guys.
Right. It is interesting to see what facet of the economy people are focused on, depending on their party, right? Is it the jobs or is it inflation? Overall, how do Americans view his leadership in navigating it? Do they have confidence that he's going to be helpful to them when it comes to the numbers?
Well, a couple of things. One thing that stood out for me is when we asked people if they thought he ought to run for a second term, as he is, what you saw was 4 in 10 Democrats, and I'll circle this right here, said that they didn't think he ought to be. They were concerned about what might happen in a second term. It's not that they don't support him. They do, those Democrats. But that concern about the second term. And I think what we've seen is, I know what we've seen, is that he does better among folks who want a president who is predictable, who is calm. Those are all things that were selling points for him, of course, in 2020 when he won. But now the question is, what else can he deliver on the economy or be seen as delivering on the economy, and maybe allaying some of those fears even among his own party. So I think those are the two key things that we look for going forward, guys.
Well, really insightful information. Thank you so much for joining us today. It helps us understand going into an election year where Americans really are standing, and breaking it down in the way you did was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.